Now we're back, trying to get into one of the most contentious parts of I would say analytics, right? So I've had several clients that when they get into this part, it makes their head spin, because the attribution and how things line up is something that is very hotly contested, right? It's more, these models are going to be designed to give credit in certain interaction points throughout the sales flow, right? And depending on what your product is, whether it's something with a very short sales cycle or a very long sales cycle, it's the attribution model can have dramatically different results based off of which one you're choosing. So I'm going to run down through these, just kind of explain which are the underlying, I guess, value behind them and the underlying context behind each one of them. Explain some of the differences between Google Analytics and then within your AdWords system as well, because there's a little bit of attribution difference as far as the actual models that are available. And then we're just going to kind of discuss strategy on how to use them, right? So first of all, when you're in the system, what you want to do is, again, you're going to go to your admin panel. In the far right, you're going to have under the view section. Now, again, you may have attribution models for different views, right? We've got our test view, we've got our raw data view, our master view in here. And, the attribution model we're going to do for the master view is what we're looking at here. You click on attribution models. Now, what you're setting in here is what your attribution model that's going to be within the account. So we're also going to cover the attribution modeling tool, which kind of will let you do comparisons across them, right? Kind of helps you form gaps. So whenever you get in here, you hit new attribution model. And let's say we want to do time decay. So that's the one I typically go with, right? You have 5 different options in here. You have your linear, first interaction, last interaction, time decay, and position based. So your linear, it's going to give equal portions to every touch point as it goes along that line, right? So regardless of, and you're going to see here in a second, like whenever, let's say we're doing linear, actually, I'll go ahead and touch on it now. If we're doing linear, like it's your look back window, right? So what it's going to do is if we have a 90-day look back window and we've interacted with 8 times over that 90 days, it doesn't matter if that first one was way back 89 days ago, it's still going to give it as much credit as the last click before they converted. So that's what that linear model is. It gives equal portion to each one of the conversions as they go along. Now, again, you can change this look back window where if you have a shorter sales cycle to kind of reduce that and give equal value. But the linear model is more for, it's kind of really things that, again, are either very, very short sales cycles, 7 days, 1 day, click, something like that. And it's not a widely used one. The other one that is used is the first interaction, right? First interaction is going to be, it's going to give the majority of the credit to that first interaction, right? Maybe gives 100% of the credit to that first interaction. Now, again, this is on a 90-day cycle. So if you look at, say, they click on my Google ad and display 60 days ago, and then all of a sudden they run across us just by happening on a video on YouTube, then it's still going to give every bit of credit back to that display click that had the 90 days. So if you're talking about utilizing the linear, the first click, or we've got the last click as well, which gives 100% to the last click, then you really, really want to have shorter look back periods here, right? And that's what this is going to be able to adjust on, right? You can go, if I'm doing a last click attribution, I'm going to look at like 5 days. Even if the reality of it is most people aren't going to remember brands without some sort of recall after 7 to 10 days. The reality of it, you better have a really, really strong brand or something that they're in vital need of but just can't afford, right? That's about if you want to have any sort of longer period for any one of these models, because it's making very, very strong assumptions that either that first impression or that last impression was the most valuable, right? Even with linear, where you can adjust the credit that you go down through here, right? But then it gets very, very complicated. So like you look at here, right? This next portion is adjust credit for impressions, right? Credit for 1 impressions times other interactions in your conversion path, right? So this, you can adjust what they are impressed. But again, the only way that they're going to pick that up is if they interacted with the ad, they clicked on it. You have some advanced options. When impression precedes a visit by 1 minute, by 90 minutes, hours, days. You can get hyper granular with adjusting these. I don't really necessarily recommend that because you're talking about some very, very minute interactions and very specific, right? With analytics and all the AI and smart learning that Google's really been doing in the last few years, then their algorithms and just their reporting has gotten a lot better. So what I typically go with is this time decay model. Right? The time decay model, you still have the ability to adjust all the impressions, but I really don't do that. I don't adjust for the impressions, right? Adjust, maybe engagement, page depth, I'll adjust sometimes. Don't always have that on. Normally, I'll just do a time decay, and depending on what the sales cycle is on it, right? It's going to give me, I'll even do a 90-day, because the reality of it is if it's going to reduce the credit as the further away it gets from that initial click. So if that initial click happened 90 days ago, it's not going to give it a whole lot of credit, right? Versus that last click. And it does more of a realistic model of what people do, right? The longer you have from your initial interaction or from your last interaction point, the less likely that you're doing branded searches, that you are, that it's really driving a whole lot of that sales behavior or that buying behavior. It's really moving away from that initial interaction. So the other option that we have is the position based, right? And that one where you get like, basically, hey, I'm going to give 40% to the first interaction. Any middle interactions are 20%. Last interaction is 40%. But you can adjust this, right? Like we can do 60%. We can do the initial interactions were 20 and 20. Right? You can adjust all this. And again, there isn't really any best practice or hard set rule that you need to follow with these attribution models. It's really based off of what your product is, what your target demographic is, and what their sales cycle is, right? That's really what you need to look at the most. And how impactful are these ads, right? If it's something where that initial interaction is immediately sending them to the web page and they're spending 15 minutes on it, then that's a pretty freaking valuable interaction, and I would give a lot of credit to it. But if it takes 4 or 5 interactions to get them to actually engage with the website at a much higher rate, then that might be something that you can adjust for. But again, a lot of how you adjust within these particular segments is based off of your product and the service that you're trying to offer to these customers, because the interaction point, even the content that they're interacting with, can have tremendously different impactful points and engagement rates as they go down through that funnel. And as you can adjust these regardless of what you're talking about, right? We go back to the linear, even then you can adjust the credit for impressions, right? Credit for this. You can do this with every single one. Right? Even the interaction points, right? You can specify these interactions and get more granular or exclude particular interactions, right? If we want to do exclude from campaign, exactly matching, remarketing, right? Then this particular model going forward isn't going to provide, it's not going to give any credit to the remarketing campaigns. It's always going to divert it back to the other one. Even if somehow they slipped into the remarketing campaign or that first interaction wasn't very valuable, it's going to put it in there, right? Or let's say your YouTube stuff. And the or statements, again, it's similar to, a Google or a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet, right? You can it's basically like writing a little algorithm. You can adjust this stuff on the different metrics. Like if we don't want the source, containing Facebook. Exclude. Exactly matching, begins with, ends with, contains. Right? I'll usually do containing just so, because you'll notice once you start seeing the URLs in here that they'll be, especially if you're utilizing the tracking tool, like your URLs become a lot longer as they start reporting in here. So these are the or. So this is basically like exclude if it's YouTube or if it's Facebook. Right? Or you can stack it where it's like, okay, hey, and it's targeting type from social. All right, so it has to match all of 3 or one of these parameters, right? Plus this, right? So one of these parameters plus this is the parameter that it would match to specify interactions with will receive 100% of the credit. So, right, if basically if it doesn't meet any of these, like if it's a Google and Google search click, then that's going to get 100% of the first interaction credit on this. If you want to do it last interaction, you can do the same thing, right? It's these variables. Now, again, time decay, you still have the ability to do custom rules down here. If you want to exclude certain things, the apply credit, right? You can still do based on user engagement, time or page depth, and you can still do the credits where they're based on impressions. There is no hard set fast rule for these, right? Like I said, I prefer the time decay. Some people may prefer the position based. If this is talking about, this is where they're clicking on it, and this is where they're just viewing a video, and this is where they're clicking again, then maybe that's the position base is more valuable for you because you view the click as a greater engage than them watching a video, right? But again, this is completely up to your personal behavior or your personal preference, I should say. I always go with the time decay. I figured most people, it's good to start off with the time decay. And then if you see, as you get, more accounts or get greater, spend within your account, then it'll change this up as well, right? So you can always adjust this and go back. But what you're setting here at the admin panel is what's going to be reflected within the account, okay? So the next portion that you can do this is going to be this comparison tool, right? So it's something we didn't really talk about in the slide deck, but this conversion option down at the lower end, right? You have your goals. This is going to give you specifics to your goals that you've set within the account. This is going to be specific to your e-commerce goals. Let's move me over here. And then you have your multi-channel funnels, right? This is really a cool tool because you can see like how people are interacting with each component, right? Then you have basically a nice little instruction since it's a brand new account. Still have the instructions up here, but so if you do assisted conversions, right? If we look at top conversion paths, let's look at that, right? This is a cool tool to look at, but it'll show you referral direct. We had 136 conversions there. Organic to direct, we had 136 conversions. It's $220 as the conversion value, right? Direct, it'll give you information on the different pathways that they're hitting to really kind of isolate that. And again, it doesn't, one mistake that a lot of people make is they say, oh, well, the majority of my conversions are just going direct. So what do I need this stuff? Well, a lot of this is, again, this is a funnel, right? People have so much competition and there's so many options on the internet that in this particular case, they probably found you organically, right? But then they were like, oh, well, I got to go to Amazon and see what it's over there. Because if you're a product or an e-commerce company, you're probably directly competing with Amazon on something. Right? If you are a service company, then they're going to go back and look at who else is in the local services, right? They might go to the Better Business Bureau. They might go to, some other Angie's List to try and review your reviews. So that's what these are. It's you really just need to make sure, like, if it's something where it's direct organic, then look at those users. And if you have a high bounce rate on that first touch, then it kind of improve that experience on the first touch landing page. The time path is going to show you like time days whenever from their first interaction to their conversion point, right? You see this conversions time, like the first day was pretty much 2,000, right? And $900. Where it took them a couple days to figure it out was a lot lower. So you can figure that like the better you can increase that experience on that first touch point, the better you're going to increase this conversion rate, right? Percentage of total sales, 73% on first touch. So this person doesn't really have a long sales cycle, right? I mean, they have quite a bit, but for the most part, it's hey, I found the product, I clicked on it that first day. So if you're looking at those 1 or 2 touch point sales, right, you know that all you can really do is improve that experience on that first touch point, right? And you have the path length. It shows you again, kind of the similar thing. It just shows how many interactions, right? This is how many clicks, how many times they had to interact with the ad, right? The majority of those 2,000 clicks had to interact. It was pretty much a first click. It's really only a 2-click path for this particular customer for the majority of their sales, because that's right there is, almost 2,200. So those 2,200 that we saw within this time path lag is going to do that. Right? So that's where you're going to see kind of the funnels coming in and seeing how these attribution and where it's attributing to each network. Now the actual attribution models, if you go down here, it's all the way down here at the bottom. It's a model comparison. This is where you can look at what you're using right now and how you can compare it to other different models, right? If I'm using, let's say, last interaction versus first interaction. First interaction, 1,200 conversions, first interaction, right? So this was most people converted on a second interaction, right? Not many people, at least from directly, like their last interaction was different than their first, right? They had to have, if they directly went to the site, it means they had to go somewhere else to either research, get, brand or social validation, figure out some loyalty, check, your Better Business Bureau, something along that aspect of it. Now, if you look in here, this comparison tool gives a lot more options than the actual models, right? It gives last non-direct click, gives last Google ads clicked, first interaction, linear, time decay, position-based. The thing that I would caution against is these are cool to kind of understand and formulate some hypothesis about, okay, well, let's say we did last non-Google click to compare them all together, right? So, well, it looks like last Google ads click, looks like the majority of these 1,295 clicks, their last click was actually on a Google. So they were going directly from Google, right, into there. Very few were first interactions. For organic stuff, right, last interaction, not so much. Their first interaction was from organic, but not so much from Google, right? It's, from other organic natures where they're doing it, or Google ads click, sorry. So these are, kind of where you want to look at when you're comparing these models. Now you can also get into the source mediums and see how they're interacting. Like Google organic, last interaction was 868, first interaction was 1,200. So we're still converting the majority of our customers on that first interaction. So that's what we need to optimize, is that first interaction. Not so much the last interaction. Yeah, we could improve that, but where we're going to see really the low-hanging fruit is in that first interaction. And that's what you should really utilize this particular model comparison tool for, is to just validate what your particular hypothesis is, right? You shouldn't make really dynamic changes or not make movements based off of, oh, well shit, this is completely different. This says that the majority of, there's a large majority coming from last interaction, but the overall majority is coming from your first interaction. So that's where you should really focus the majority of your efforts and utilize that almost 80-20 rule, right? That's the 20% of your account on that first interaction that's going to equate to the majority of your revenue right there. So that's where you should focus your efforts. And that's really kind of a validation of your time management, right? It'll help you kind of understand where you should focus the majority of your time in optimizing and using these attribution models. And the key consistency of it is make sure you're using the same one day over day and week over week, right? Don't 1 week use the first interaction and then all of a sudden switch to the last interaction. Like, there's that consistency that needs to be maintained throughout the entire process in order for these to actually be of any value to you. If you start varying them up, then it's shit. Like, there's no reason to use them. Okay. So the other thing that we have that's actually within Google, which is kind of cool, is we have these data-driven models, right? So as we go into those, we're basically going to look into these, and we set up our conversion. We've set up all the different value. And then down here at the bottom, you have your attribution model, how you want that specific conversion to really record in the Google system. Okay. So your attribution models are going to be in about 3 different places, right? You're going to set, like I told you, for the default one within the account, within analytics on the view screen. And that's going to be for all the data that you're seeing on your dashboards. Then you also have the comparison tool where you can utilize those. Now, that one you set at the view, that's going to be where the majority of or all of your metrics within your conversion paths and within your audience tabs, within your behavior tabs, that one within the view is what all of those are going to be based off of. The comparison tool is just something for you to kind of validate your results and see if there's not something that's a little bit more aligned, or, if all of a sudden you realize that, hey, I'm using last click model, but the majority of the people are, converting they're going from, first interaction to direct, and they're converting, then that first interaction point, you should give much more credit. I would caution anybody against giving 100% of credit to any sort of area, right? The last click versus first click interaction models or attribution models, they're really, really outdated when you consider the overall digital marketing landscape, right? We're hitting customers across multiple devices at multiple times on multiple networks. And they're using different attribution models even when you're reporting on those different different networks and different touch points. So trying to give 100% credit to any one point it's ridiculous, right? They're going to have additional points because everybody goes through a research phase, and at some point in time, whether or not they came to your site and they purchased on that first click, somebody put them in their mind, right? Whether or not it was a friend from a word of mouth, whether or not it was some sort of article that was shown on display, it was a video they saw on YouTube, or there's some sort of way that you got their name on your basically name on the tip of their tongue. So to try and give 100% credit to any point in that interaction is pretty ridiculous, right? We've talked continuously about the funnel and the different stages. At the top funnel, where you have the awareness, you have that kind of comfortability and getting your brand name and your product on the tip of their tongue, but they're not going to immediately buy it just because you say, hey, I'm badass and I got this thing, right? There's too much fraud, there's too much competition, there's too much just options on the internet. So what are they going to do? They're going to go through their research phase. They're going to go look on other sites. They're going to get that social validation. They're going to check on your company so you can build that loyalty and the trust. They're going to go through that phase before they ever click on your ad again to go to your site and purchase. So to not give some sort of credibility throughout that file is just, it's stupid. We'll just put it there, right? So stay away from the last click or the first click, right? I'm not going to say that a lot of times I'll use the last click within my call campaigns because we don't have funnels. Like, they find our ad, they click, and they go, right? Sometimes I'll look at the linear stuff, but we don't do a lot of conversions based off of longer sales cycles. Where I'm looking to do more of that is in my e-commerce clients, right? And even then, I want to know those different touch points where it's getting the activity and how long that conversion path really is. So if I can't see if I can cut some of those out and shorten it up by making those previous touch points of more value, right? It's not that I'm going to cut them completely out. Is what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the relevance and the value of those previous touch points to try and shorten that cycle. And that's what you want to do. Don't try and get cute and think you can reinvent the wheel. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, we know most of our traffic comes from Facebook, and then they're directly going to our site, and we should just shut off Google, right? Or we should just shut off, our blog, and we don't have to write about on our website and put time into the SEO features, right? That's bullshit, right? The omni-channel is, because of all the connected devices that are out there, is where the path is going. And it's where AI, and it's also where the smart learning that Google and a lot of these other networks are using is keying in on, right? It's making these very responsive ads so that you can actually contact these customers on these different outlets in a very relevant, highly experience-driven kind of manner. And, with anything that I'm going to go on here, I'm going to do I'm going to start off with the linear one or the time decay, right? Depending on what the sales cycle is. If it's shorter, might give it the linear. If it's a longer sales cycle, I'm going to go with the time decay. The position based, that's really if you're a really control freak, right? If you've got where, hey, I'm just going to give a percentage here and percentage here, and I want to really control that. But that's a lot more optimizations and control than I would necessarily, put into these systems. Just as a kind of a PSA almost, is both Facebook and Google and most ad networks optimize based off of having capabilities of seeing multiple data points. And the more that you can feed them with the less restrictions and allow them to find their path without it breaking you, basically, without breaking the bank, then it's better off for you, right? If you can utilize these campaigns, within Google and even within Facebook, I've killed complete campaigns because I've gone in and I've been like, oh man, I know this is an audience that I want, or I know this isn't an audience. But the problem is when you're talking about audiences, they could very easily overlap. A price shopper and somebody that loves to shop for discount items could just as easily be somebody that shops for luxury goods, right? So those two overlapping, and when you start trying to put all these, variables in, or try and make, really just hardline assessments when you're dealing with audience targeting, at least, or when you're trying to do assessments with attribution, it can just the overlap can kill your shit, basically, right? So you really want to make sure that you're giving it the most opportunity to try and figure out what that path is. And for me, what I recommend is that time decay model. Right? The data-driven model is really, really cool, but if you're trying to match up your attribution models across what you're looking at within Google Analytics and your Google Ads account, and even like your other platforms such as Yahoo, Bing, or social within Facebook or Instagram, the time decay model is a pretty much synonymous model across all of them. So it's going to be the closest one that you can kind of get the most accurate data, and it's going to use some of that smart learning to make sure that it's really giving credit where credit's due, right? Where the interactions and the engagements were actually valuable, and it wasn't just an ad that was showing up at the bottom of the page that they didn't interact with or even very, likely see. Right. So the time decay is the one that I'm going to recommend for you. If you want to go into the analytics and do more of that kind of really higher level optimizations of how it determines where that is based off of page views, page interactions, that kind of stuff, be my guest, right? More power to you. But again, the system it's pretty damn smart. It's probably fucking a lot smarter than any of us. And I used to not say that, right? I've been doing this for 10 years, and for my first 5 years when I worked with Google, I would typically argue with them constantly about what their attribution models or what their algorithms were going to do, because the data told me something different. But they've made tremendous strides with having to deal with Facebook as competition, because Facebook does really, really well at really refining and honing in those audiences. So Google has really started to do that as well with their overall theming of people's interactions and the way that they're interacting with ads, right? Where if I show you an ad and you don't interact with it, I'm probably not going to show you that ad. I might show it to you maybe once or twice more, but it's not going to be of value to us, because Google, at some point in time, there is kind of this hand-in-hand relationship, right? Google wants you to show your ad, but they want people to click on it, and because they can charge you money. And if they click on it and they convert, if they're delivering higher value customers that have more information as far as what their particular buying patterns are, what they're in market for, if they can tie that data in there to increase that sales cycle or lower that sales cycle, increase your conversion rates, then their assumption is you're going to throw that money back into Google. So they really are getting much more on our side as far as whenever it comes to delivering customers and making sure that whenever they're delivering our ad and spending our valuable money, that they are making an impact on it, right? So you still have to have the parameters in there to kind of just give it the proper starting gate. But for the most part, Google's doing really, really well. So I trust very much the time decay model. If you're only really dealing with, Google Ads and not really diving a whole lot into using the attribution models, like if it's a customer we're just doing lead gen, something like that and we're just trying to, drive health insurance leads, then the data driven model is a great option, right? It's going to give you the most information. Right? We don't have currently enough data in here. It's a new account, but what it does is basically it's once you hit your 15 conversions within the account, and it can actually start honing in and understanding where your conversions are coming from, and how that behavior of that customer is. And it starts utilizing that data to get into your bidding models and optimize your conversion CPA numbers, right? So on any account where you're just starting out, and right where we are with starting these things out with, getting our Google search going, now we're just kind of stepping into, display and shopping. And now we're really diving into analytics to really get an overall view of everything. The time decay model is going to be your best kind of model to really start with. Then once it starts delivering that data, and you can pick it apart and start, realizing which one of these models is going to be best for the ultimate long-term growth of your business. But until you start getting the data in there and you start getting that consistency, I wouldn't really make any hard line scenarios. It's just my personal preference, time decay. If you have a personal preference of, position best or linear, go ahead with you. There is no wrong answer to this. The ultimate goal is to make sure that you're getting the proper tracking tools in place so you can start getting the data, so you can start making those dynamic adjustments and optimization to improve and grow your accounts and put more money back in your pocket. So we're going to dive more into the strategy and how to use this stuff in the next lesson modules, and to understand exactly how to really optimize and do some of the remarketing and really take this data and this higher level understanding and transparency of what is happening on our website and start turning it into more profit for us. So we'll see you in the next module.